Silksong, the long-awaited sequel to Hollow Knight, and with about 50 hours worth of content to explore, you might be wondering how long it took speedrunners to break the game. Looking back to Hollow Knight, some of the first glitches found near the game's release involved opening menus at specific times and breaking out of bounds, allowing runners to beat the game in under an hour. Moving forward in Hollow Knight's speedrun history to 2020, we see that even more powerful glitches were discovered that make it possible to beat the game in under 20 minutes, with the current time being optimized to under 5. Given that it took 3 years to get Hollow Knight below 10 minutes, how long do you think it took Silksong? Well, just 21 days after the game was released, Nebula had already beat it in under an hour, using some movement-based skips and other minor glitches. However, while beating Silksong in under an hour is incredible, what if I told you that a week after that, someone beat it in under 10 minutes? In today's video, we'll look at the glitches players discovered, investigate how they work, and see how they come together in a route that beats the final boss in under 10 minutes. While timing for this run starts when you begin loading the opening cutscene, there's a small bit of setup before the run starts. The first is setting the language to Mandarin Chinese, as that has the fastest text scrolling speed, as well as toggling a few options, such as setting the frame rate lower, which makes hitting some of the tricks we'll see a lot easier. Once those settings are changed, it's time to begin the run. However, we won't be playing for long, because we need to quit back out to the main menu, as there's something important we need to do on the file select screen that makes the entire run possible, and that's main menu storage. Main menu storage is one of the tricks having a lower frame rate helps with, because you need to cancel out of selecting a new game by pressing both mouse buttons on the same graphics frame. The setup also involves quickly selecting different files where your timing is dependent on the load times you have, since if you click too early, you won't get the glitch, and if you click too late, you can't skip cutscenes. But if you're Goldilocks and click the file just right, you'll successfully complete main menu storage and get a powerful glitch called room dupe. It might be hard to tell right now, but there are 2 instances of the first tutorial room loaded at the same time, and this is because due to main menu storage, the game loaded our fresh file and our old file. At its face, this may not seem useful, but when you go through a transition, something very strange happens. The game only transitions you from one of the rooms, which means you now have 2 different rooms loaded at the same time. The best way to think about room duping is to imagine there being a stack of 2 rooms, the loaded room, which is the one on top, and the active room, which is the one on bottom. When you enter a new room by taking a transition, the game pushes the loaded room down, making it the new active room, and the room you arrive in becomes the new loaded room, with the old active room getting deleted from the stack. And the real power for this glitch comes from how transitions work while room duping. Every room has transitions that lead to other rooms, and all of them are named based on where they are located. So a single transition at the top of a room is called top 1, with 2 transitions on the right of the room being called right 1, right 2, and so on. But when you enter a transition, the game doesn't look at where you entered on that screen. Instead, it looks at where you would load on the screen connected to that transition. So a right 1 transition would lead to a left 1 on the connected room, and that left 1 transition is where the game looks at. However, when a room dupe is active, the game doesn't look at the room adjacent to the loaded room when it's figuring out where to load you during a transition. Instead, it looks at the active room. So let's say these are your loaded and active rooms and you exit through left 1 in the loaded room. The game would then load you into right 1 on the active room and change the rooms in the stack accordingly. You might be wondering what happens if there isn't a matching transition to load you at in the active room. In that case, the game would look at the room above the active room on the list, which is the loaded room, so you'd get the normal transition if it fails to find one in the active room. So, once speedrunners start the game, they quit out, then set up main menu storage so that when they enter the new file, they're already in a room dupe, which you can tell by the colors of the room being slightly different than normal. Then, they abuse the room dupe to quickly navigate the map. They pick up some rosaries early on as they're required later as currency, and an unfortunate side effect of room duping is that a lot of what's happening on screen takes place completely blind or obscured. But world record holder Meemee was kind enough to provide a special run where you can see what's going on. The first 2 minutes of the run are spent getting to Bone Bottom because we need to access a bench in Shellwood for a glitch we're going to do later. So, by room duping, then doing a very specific movement pattern, we arrive at Bone Bottom. But there's a problem. The path we need to take is above us and there's no way of getting there, so we're going to do another room dupe while the screen is completely black. Since our loaded room has 2 right side loads but our active room doesn't have the load we need to arrive on top, we're going to enter a house in Bone Bottom to change our room stack until we get a load that will take us to the upper right. Once there, we'll need to break a rosary to get more beads, while being careful not to knock any into the pit, as if we miss a single one, the run will be over. Now, you might be wondering how long it takes the No Major Glitches speedrun to get to Bone Bottom, and the answer is 14 minutes, as they need to fight 3 bosses and take a more intended route before dropping in from the top, so we're already 12 minutes ahead in terms of progression. And next, we're going to do one of the hardest skips in the game, Phasia Skip. Here's what Phasia Skip looks like. Oh, you couldn't see anything? Neither can the player, but with special footage we're able to see what's going on. On the other side of the Phasia enemy, there's a ledge you can't reach with a normal jump, but if you jump into the Phasia's AoE attack at the right angle, the knockback from the attack will give you the height and momentum you need to cross the gap. So you might be thinking, how do runners do this while the screen is black? If you're familiar with blindfolded runs, audio feedback and buffered movement where you count out beats are common methods for setups, and SavvyNov found a setup for Phasia Skip that does just that. By listening to Hornet's footsteps, you'll get a good idea of where you are. Then, by jumping, waiting, and jumping again, you'll be aligned for Phasia's attack and make the jump. There is another route, however, where instead of going to the Phasia, you drop down and go to the Bell Shrine. Then room dupe to get where we're going, but this route is slower than using Phasia Skip because it involves watching animations and setting up a second room dupe. So you might think, okay, if Phasia Skip is faster, why even bother going with the Bell Shrine route? And that's because if you do Phasia Skip, you need to complete the 2 hardest rooms in the run. After picking up the Cling Grip skill and doing another dupe transition, we arrive at a room with a pit that's completely obscured. Coincidentally, an NPC starts dialogue that stops you from falling in the pit. But after that, you need to travel a large distance, then climb up a specific spot with only audio feedback to guide you. By using down attacks, you can get to the approximate location. Then, by listening to the type of sound coming from Hornet's footsteps, you can narrow down your position. The goal is to get on top of this raised platform, which you'll know because it's the only spot with metallic sounding footsteps, and once on it, you ascend up to the next difficult section. This may look easy with the lights turned on, but the ledges are spaced just enough that only precise jumps, guided by audio feedback and knowing the spacing of your actions, will see you through successfully when the screen is black. After those difficult rooms, we come to what is perhaps the most broken glitch in the game, and it's also the reason we needed to collect 60 beads, this bench in Shellwood Room 11. This may look like an ordinary bench, because it is, but unlocking this bench is the most important part of the run, because what we're going to do next is completely insane. First, we're going to intentionally die to the thorn hazard on the left, and the reason for this is because of how this particular death is handled while a room dupe is active. Recall that when the game needs to load you somewhere in a room dupe, it looks at the active room rather than the loaded room. Well, we just died, so the game needs to load us somewhere, and since we just activated and used a bench, it looks for a bench to load us at, but there's a problem. Our active room doesn't have a bench, so the game then tries to load us to the tutorial room as a failsafe. However, this also has a problem since we're still in a room dupe, and while we are loaded into the tutorial room, the room we were just in is now our active room. And it just so happens that where we get loaded in the tutorial room overlaps with the thorn patch in the active room, so we load in just to die. Fortunately, there's another built-in failsafe for this situation, where the game looks at where your hazard respawn is if you die in a hazard. So instead of endlessly getting spawned into the duped hazard, it looks at the most recent transition we exited from and spawns us there, which in this case is the room we unlocked the bench in. It's absolutely insane that Team Cherry coded in logic for all of these situations that realistically should never happen. And it's even more crazy that they're routed into the speedrun. But because of this, we now have the rooms stacked in a very particular way, and it's time to break this ordinary bench by going down one room. This room is very important because it has the pond catcher enemy, and what we're going to do is manipulate her AI so she gets stuck under this small wharf. which is very hard to do since she can't touch water or she dies. But if you get her there, then die to her attack, something very special happens. When you spawn on a bench, you're put into a temporary state called no-clip, where you're invincible for a few seconds and can walk through walls. Normally, this doesn't do anything, since the state ends as the respawn animation plays out. But because we're in a room dupe, the room we were just in becomes the active room, so the pond catcher spawns into the room with us. Now, the pond catcher has a 4-second windup between attacks, and part of the earlier setup was to keep her in her attack animation when we died, because when we respawn, she'll hit us while the no-clip is still active, causing it to be permanently applied to us. While under the effects of no-clip, there are a ton of things that happen. Most importantly, you no longer have collision with walls and can fly by jumping. But you can't descend without doing a downward attack, so navigation is a bit tricky. However, if there's a door that's blocked, it's now easy to get behind since you can fly through whatever's blocking it, further expanding the navigational possibilities while room duping. There is one major restriction, however. Because of how upward transitions work, the game expects you to become grounded as part of the animation when going through them. But since you're in no-clip, you never get re-grounded, so the load never completes, resulting in a hard lock. This doesn't happen with a bottom load, but since on the other side of a bottom load is a top load, it is possible you touch the top load and hard lock on the other side. And for these reasons, you're mostly limited to left and right transitions while no-clipping. Incredibly, there's still a route that only uses left and right transitions to get you to the end of the game while room duping. And speaking of duping, once you get to the Citadel, there's a special room that needs to be accessed. Certain rooms with cutscenes will be interpreted by the game as being 2 rooms. And when you enter one of these rooms while room duping, the stack of rooms increases by 1. This means that great care needs to be taken when executing the route, as recovering from entering a wrong room is nearly impossible with a larger stack. But with careful routing, you'll eventually have 2 very special rooms in the stack. One of these rooms spawns the boss when you land on the challenge point, and since we loaded in from below the challenge point, we need to slow our no-clip speed by pausing, which decreases our speed by half every time we pause, slowing us just enough that we can activate the challenge point and summon the boss. Now, at this point, we have virtually no upgrades, deal next to no damage, and have no equipable objects to make this fight easier. So, I guess it's a good thing that the other room we duped has 6 spinning saws that are hostile to enemies. With no-clip still active, all that's needed is to move to one side so the boss tries to follow you, where she then takes damage until she dies. So I guess not only is this a speedrun of Silksong in under 10 minutes, it's also technically a pacifist run, as not a single enemy was harmed by Hornet's sword at any point. Huge thanks to Meemee for help with this video. Be sure to check her out at the links below. And the algorithm thinks you'll like the video on screen. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next year on a brand new season of Abyssoft Z.